Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about bonding and control theories, and there are multiple theories we'll discuss within um, this lecture. But this chapter, so last chapter was social learning theories, and then this chapter was social bonding theory and self-control theory specifically, are kind of the big pinnacle theories within criminology. If you don't remember or learn any other theories, social learning theory, social bonding theory, and self-control theory are probably the three most important theories for you to know as a criminology student. So, control theorists, somewhat in arrogance, somewhat in a misguided statement, actually tried to argue that every other theory of crime and deviance is actually focused on criminality. Why do people commit crime? What is it about society or the individual that causes people to be pushed toward deviance? So really, they're kind of asking a different question from all these other theories. Control theorists argue that what they really do is actually ask what is keeping us from committing crime. So instead of what's pushing us toward, what's keeping us from committing crime, right? There are basic controls in life, and when these controls break down, crime happens, right? So what are these controls? And they use examples like society after a natural disaster. Whenever a hurricane rolls through, you see all sorts of looting and things like that happening. After maybe a police shooting, you might see rioting where the police all kind of retreat back, and there's no control there, and so there's a lot of deviance that happens. The basic idea of control theories is if we would get away with it, we would do it. Of course, that asks the question, is that actually true? Would we actually do it? Are all of us actually murderers, but we just think we're going to get caught? Ironically enough, in fact, most control theories don't even measure conforming motivations. And so they have this kind of pseudo-intellectual argument in control theories of, we're actually asking a different question. We're asking, why do you follow the law, not why do you break the law? But the way we're going to measure that is by measuring, why do you break the law, right? And so they don't actually answer any question differently from other theories, but they like to pretend they do. They measure causes of delinquency, which the theory assumes would just happen, right? So basically what they say is, we're measuring what causes you not to commit crime, but then ask you, what is it that made you commit a crime? Well, we're looking at the causes here, not the conforming. So if the dependent variable in the theory is still crime, it's not really different from other theories. And, by the way, the DV is always deviance or crime, and conformity is really just kind of the other side of the same coin. So in practice, there really is no difference. But it's important to understand this kind of control theory dance that control theorists do, because when you read control theories and their original authors and stuff, you'll see this kind of pseudo-intellectualism take place where they discuss how we're actually asking a different, more enlightened question than all the other theorists are. So early control theories suggested that there was basically internal and external controls that were exhibited over individuals to keep them from committing crime, right? And the causes of crime are just failures of these personal and social controls. So personal controls are internal, things like self-control or your conscience, and there are external social controls, which are external applications of legal and informal sanctions, like, for example, the arrest of yourself or a friend, maybe your friends not wanting to hang out with you, right? If you and your friends are all very, very close, but one of you decides to start shooting up heroin, the rest of you maybe won't hang out with that person anymore, right? That's an external control that keeps you from shooting up heroin to make sure that you still have your friend or familial attachments. There are three main categories of social control or controls in general, right? There's direct control, which is punishment imposed for misconduct and compliance is rewarded, right, by parents, teachers, friends, right? So if you break the law, you're punished, right? Maybe you get spanked, maybe you get a timeout or grounded in some capacity by your parents, and when you do well in school, maybe you get a reward for it. There's indirect control, which is you don't have crime because of the potential pain to parents and friends, and these are things kind of like, I'm very disappointed in you, or I don't want to upset my parents, right? And then there are internal controls, and this is conscience or sense of guilt that controls your behavior. I would feel bad about myself if I did that, and so I'm not going to do it. The lack of familial reinforcement could cause youth to seek reinforcement elsewhere. which is one of the main arguments by control theorists as to why gangs happen, right? There is no familial reinforcement, and so you end up hanging out with a gang and they have different levels of control over you. So Reckless had this idea of containment theory, and this is one of the control theories, which is basically the same idea of internal and external controls, but he called them inner and outer containment. And these are things that kind of push you or pull you toward deviance, right? And if you think about containment theory, it's basically like a boat tied to a dock. There are two reasons why you tie a boat to a dock, right? Because you don't want your boat pushed up on land to where you can't get it off, or you don't want your boat pulled out to sea where you can't get to your boat, right? And so you tie up or contain the boat with these ties to keep the boat in place. Now, depending on how strong the current is and how big the tidal shifts are, depends on how much containment you need or how much control you need over your boat, right? If you know a hurricane's coming, you may throw on several extra ropes to make sure the boat doesn't go anywhere, right? And the same basic idea is here in containment theory, right? Youth are pushed or pulled toward deviance unless counteracted by some sort of inner or outer containment. So deviance is going to happen unless things happen to stop it. Outer containment is essentially the same thing as external controls, where the parental and school supervision and discipline affect your behavior, and inner containment is basically things like good self-concept and your conscience to keep you from committing crime as well. And so you can see how inner and outer containment, internal external controls, they're all kind of the same idea, right? Where there's controlling your behavior to keep you from committing crime, right? Techniques of neutralization is another idea in control theory that is used by people to kind of justify their deviant acts, right? And so techniques of neutralization, again, are just justifications or excuses for committing deviant acts, and they use the same logic as in conforming behavior, right? We have these subterranean values that circumvent conventional values, but we can justify them in some way, right? So, for example, I'm sure all of you have seen the movie Taken, right? At the end, when Liam Neeson finds his daughter in that kind of raffle, for lack of better verbiage, of the females there at the end, he finds the owner of the house and ends up killing him in an elevator. But before he shoots him in the head, he said, "Hey, one of the girls you took was my daughter." And he goes, "Sir, wait, before you hurt me, you need to understand it was just business. All right? It was never personal." And of course, Liam Neeson says, "It was always personal to me," and shoots him in the head, right? By the way, spoilers for anyone who hasn't seen that movie. So the basic idea there, though, again, was right, there's this justification. It's like, yeah, technically I'm kidnapping young women, selling them as sex slaves, but you need to understand it's okay because it was just business. I was just being a good businessman, right? And it's like, well, that's kind of ridiculous, right? But that's how you can rationalize that kind of behavior. Now, the authors of Techniques of Neutralization, Sykes and Matza, admit that this is essentially the same as definitions as originally stated by Sutherland, right? They basically got this idea from Sutherland and Akers with their definitions idea, or definitions that are pro-deviant. But these are just more specific definitions. And there are 5 basic types of techniques of neutralization that pretty much any justification or excuse can fit into. And it's important that you know these for the exam. So the first technique of neutralization is denial of injury, right? Or I didn't actually hurt anyone, right? No one, and this is not necessarily like I punched someone, but it didn't hurt that I punched them. It could even be to explain some sort of a theft, right? You could afford the loss. I walk into someone's house, they're a brain surgeon, they have 6, 75-inch TVs all over their house. I steal one of the 75-inch TVs. They're not even going to notice. It's a drop in the hat for him. He works an extra half hour. He's made up the loss. I'm denying the injury, right? It didn't actually hurt anyone. The next one is a denial of victim. Now, this denial of injury and denial of victim are the 2 most confused techniques of neutralization and the ones people get wrong the most. So it's very important that you understand the difference here. Denial of victim does not mean there is no victim. It means I am denying the status of this individual as a victim, right? The victim deserved it. The victim had it coming, right? Yeah, Hitler did end up dying at the end of World War II, But there's no way we're going to call Hitler a victim, right? He deserved it. He had it coming. He was an evil person. And so I'm not going to feel bad for what happened to him because he had it coming, right? I'm denying the status of that person as a victim. So, for example, in the spoiler that I gave you from Taken, right? Yeah, it's terrible that the guy got shot in the head, right? His family probably misses him. His kids probably don't like that their dad just got shot in the head. However, no one watching that movie really felt bad for the guy who was kidnapping women and selling them into sex slavery, right? Because he was a terrible human for doing that. And so Liam Neeson could justify killing all those people because he said they're not victims, they're bad guys, right? So denial of injury is I didn't hurt anyone, they could afford the loss, there is no real injury that took place. Denial of victim is I am refusing to admit that that person is a victim, they had it coming, it's their fault, right? This is also a justification that a lot of people use when they kill police, right? Well, if the police would stop killing black people, I would stop killing police, right? And so I'm not going to admit that I did anything wrong because the police are bad people because of what they're doing to minority communities, right? Then there's denial of responsibility, right? This is where you may be forced into the situation. This isn't my fault. You can't blame me for this. I had no ill motive. I was forced into it, right? This is what you hear a lot of people do, right? If they get drunk and commit a crime, they'll say, oh my gosh, it's not my fault, I was drunk. You'll even see this, actually, denial of responsibility happens quite a bit, and not to trigger anyone or make anyone feel upset or anything, but this is what happens a lot in when significant others cheat on each other, right? I'm sorry, I was at the bar, I was drunk, I didn't know what I was doing, it's not my fault, you can't get mad at me, right? My friends were all there, they should have stopped me. Well, or you could have been a grown-up, right? And so you were forced into the situation. I was fired from my job, so I had no choice but to steal bread to feed my family, right? Then there's condemnation of the condemners. Those who condemn you are spiteful, right? You are just as bad as we are, how dare you? Condemnation of the condemners is the justification every politician uses for everything that happens everywhere, right? You can't possibly bring up anything critical of Donald Trump without hearing what from Trump supporters in return. Yeah, but Hillary Clinton and her emails, or Hillary Clinton and Benghazi, or what did Obama do for the economy, right? Similarly, you can't be super critical of Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama without hearing from Democrats. Yeah, but what about Trump saying he's grabbing women's genitalia? What about him paying off a porn star? What about a whole list of things that he's done, right? And so it's, I don't care what I did, because you do stuff just as bad as what I do. Condemnation of condemners is also sometimes what you hear about in college athletics, right? Oh my gosh, we just found out the entire University of Alabama team was doing steroids. Well, yeah, but we all have to do steroids, otherwise we're not going to win the national championships, right? And that's also not true about University of Alabama, I don't think. But you'll hear stuff like that. We got to do what we have to do to get ahead. You're just as bad. If I follow the rules, I'm not going to be able to get ahead. So I'm not going to follow the rules because no one else is following the rules either, right? Which, of course, is not necessarily true. There's also appealing to higher loyalties. You're doing it for some sort of greater good. My friend needed me to do it. I needed to do it to feed my family. I had to do it because there's something greater than myself that I needed to save, right? Liam Neeson, even, you could argue, did this, right? The reason he killed half of Europe in Taken, again, spoilers, is because he needed to rescue his daughter, right? My daughter is going to get sold into sex slavery. I have to go kill half of Europe to make sure that doesn't happen, right? So I'm appealing to some sort of higher loyalty or doing it for some sort of greater good. You'll also hear this with these kind of weird pseudo-intellectual arguments also for why people commit crime. I think marijuana should be legalized because it's natural and it's grown in the ground, and how dare the government tell me what I can and can't do. Therefore, I'm going to smoke weed as a sign of my resistance to the man. You just like getting high. Like, let's not lie to ourselves, right? But you frame it in a way to appeal to some sort of higher loyalties. Matza, who wrote Techniques of Neutralization with Sykes, used Techniques of Neutralization for drift theory. And drift theory believes in these kind of episodic releases from moral restraints, right? We're tied up all the time, we're being constrained, we're being controlled, and every now and then we just kind of drift, right? We have these episodic releases where the boat breaks away from the dock, goes crazy, and then behavior's restrained again, right? And so this episodic release is kind of a break in the control that restrains behavior. And drift theory and techniques of neutralization are used in other theories that view control as a central tenet of crime and conformity. So you'll see these basic ideas showing up, right? But drift theory basically, and in this episodic release, this is almost kind of like the movie The Purge, right? This is the basic idea behind that. Just you have 24 hours to commit any crime you want to commit, go crazy, just have this episodic release, but in the morning, everything's back to normal and everyone behaves themselves, right? And so that's the basic idea here with drift theory, and it's tied in with techniques of neutralization. So, Travis Hershey's social bonding theory. This is definitely one of the most talked about control theories there is. Travis Hershey was a contemporary of Ron Akers. Both are still alive, but they are in the twilight of their life, if you will. Very, very bright guys. It was funny as a student of Akers, whenever you go to conferences and stuff, and Travis is there and Akers is there, it's almost kind of like the Sharks and the Jets meet up at conferences and have throwdowns and rumbles at these conferences, because they're both very, very famous, very big names, arguably two of the biggest names with Sutherland, who's passed away since now, in the field of criminology. Two of the just fathers of criminology are Akers and Hershey. One of the things that Hershey did that has completely changed the whole field of criminology, and something that even Akers will admit that he wished he had thought of but didn't, and that he gives a tremendous amount of credit to, is when Hershey proposed bonding theory. He laid out the theory, the basic propositions of the theory, and then he talked about the scope, parsimony, and empirical validity all at the same time. No other theory had that slide should say done this, not won this. No other theory had done this at this point, right? Which is super fascinating, right? So it literally changed the way criminology functions. So criminology, a bit of a history lesson in criminology. Criminology is a subfield of sociology. Specifically, it's just people who study deviance, which is a social problem within sociology, right? And so that's why it's always also comical when people say, oh, I'm a criminology major, not a sociology major. By necessity, saying you're a criminologist admits that you are part of a subfield of sociology, so you can't really separate the two. However, in sociology still today, theories are proposed and there's no attempt to test them. And what sociological theorists will say is, it's my job to develop the theory, it's someone else's job to prove it, right? Or support it, not prove it. We don't prove things in social sciences. It's someone else's job to support it or show that I'm wrong, right? Travis Hershey, when he proposed bonding theory, flipped that on its head for the entire field of criminology. No longer do we have criminological theorists that just say, here's my theory, y'all run with it. If you don't lay out at least the empirical validity or test the theory when you propose the theory, no one's going to take you seriously, and you're probably not going to get it published anywhere. And so it's a huge deal that Dr. Hershey did it this way, because it has changed the whole trajectory in the whole field and made criminology a very, very quantitative field, which is why we now have to take research methods where there's a heavy statistical emphasis within the field. So anyway, getting back to what social bonding theory is, the general proposition is that delinquent acts result when an individual's bond to society is weak or broken, right? So basically we have a bond to society. As long as we're bonded well to society, we won't commit crime. If we're not bonded well to society, crime is going to happen. Much like social learning theory, there are 4 elements to this theory: attachment, commitment, involvement, and belief. And the basic idea is the stronger the attachment, the less likely the individual will be deviant. And all of these variables are intercorrelated. The weakening of one of these things means all of them are weakened to society, and therefore the bonds to society are weakened. So what are these 4 elements and what do they mean? Well, attachment is basically the extent to which we have close affectional ties, admire, and identify with others, right? So how close we are with people. This causes us to care about others' expectations of us. So the less we care, the more likely we are to commit crime, right? And this argues that things like self-control and personal control are far too subjective. And I want you to remember that statement. Things like self-control and personal control are too subjective. They can't be measured, they can't be observed, and they're used very tautologically in early control theories. And so we can't even discuss self-control or personal control because it's tautological and we can't measure it, right? But attachment we can measure. How close do you feel to other people? Do you care about what other people think about you, right? So for example, I used it with differential association that when we talked about that within social learning theory. I said, my two best friends both have advanced degrees, my parents both have advanced degrees, my brother has an advanced degree, my wife has an advanced degree, right? So I associate with people that have advanced degrees. Attachment would suggest, in a very similar way, because I care about others' expectations, because I want other people to still like me and I don't want to lose that attachment to other people, I better get an advanced degree and not commit crime, because all those people won't want to talk to me or be my friend if I don't get an advanced degree in some capacity, right? Now that's not true, but that's just kind of an example of attachment. There's a similarity to differential association, but whereas social learning theory suggests that who you associate with affects your definitions and affects what you think you should do in life, attachment in social bonding theory suggests that because we think other people are going to be disappointed in us, we're going to go ahead and do things that we like or that are good so we don't lose that attachment. They're going to stop being friends with me and I can't handle that thought. Attachment to parents is obviously arguably the most important, right? And there's this basic idea of I'm very disappointed in you that parents might say, right? People growing up always used to say, I would rather get grounded for a month or get spanked than have my parents say, I'm very disappointed in you. And I was like, yeah, not me. I'd rather just have my parents disappointed because then I could still play video games. But attachment to peers is obviously also important, but this attachment in general is important and you don't want to disappoint your parents, right? The attachment here also, though, and this is where it's very different from social learning theory, the attachment is what is the most important. Being attached to something, not to whom one is attached, right? So that means, in theory, even juveniles attached to delinquent parents and peers will be less deviant. I could be very, very, very attached to a bunch of gang members, and according to this theory, I will not commit crime because I so don't want to lose that attachment. And if I go to jail, that attachment will be severed. And so I will not commit crime so I don't lose those attachments with those gang members. Well, odds are if you're going to continue to stay attached to gang members, you're probably going to have to do some delinquent stuff. So this doesn't necessarily make a whole lot of sense. But notwithstanding, that's the basic idea of attachment within bonding theory. So the next idea is commitment. The next variable is commitment. And this is the extent to which individuals build up an investment in conventionality that would be lost in deviant behavior, right? And this is kind of this rational element that relies on, that realizes one has invested too much to be deviant, right? So right now in my life, it would not make a whole lot of sense for me to start committing a bunch of crime because I have quite a bit to lose, right? I'm committed to conventionality because let's just say even if it was something basic, right? And now whenever I say this, people always send me angry emails. I don't mean this in a blasé way, and I'm not dismissing this or being dismissive at all, but in the grand scheme of all the criminal acts you can commit, driving home impaired is not a serious crime, right? So let's say that I'm out with my friends at the bar and I've had a little bit too much to drink, right? I have too much to lose to say, you know what, YOLO, let's see what happens and drive home, right? It makes much more sense for me to take the $3 Uber home than it is to get behind the wheel of the car, because if I got a DUI, I would probably get fired from Flagler. My wife would be pissed off, right? But it would be very difficult for me to get another job, right? Which means probably we would lose our house because we couldn't afford the mortgage without me working. We would probably, I would probably have to accept a position that paid significantly less than I'm making now. And so I'm just too committed to the lifestyle I have and to my career and to all the work I did. I mean, could you imagine going through all the work to get a PhD and then it all just vanishes, goes poof, because you had one too many martinis at Teeny Martini Bar and then decided to get behind the wheel of the car? Doesn't make sense, right? The $3 Uber is well worth the money, right? And actually get home, it cost me about $7. But regardless, right? $7 versus a DUI and losing your career, $7 seems like a great investment, right? And so there's this kind of rational element that you're just too committed, right? The same thing is true for like student athletes, right? Especially at big universities where you have potential to like go to the NFL or the NBA, right? It doesn't make sense for a lot of those guys, even though it does happen. It doesn't make sense for a lot of really good players to dabble in anything that's going to affect their potential careers, right? Which is why the vast majority don't. Now, granted, we hear about the ones that do on TV a lot, but what you don't hear about is the 98% that don't do anything, right? And so a lot of them don't do drugs. A lot of them won't drink during the season. A lot of them won't go out and party because they're so focused, like this is their shot to go be multimillionaires one day, playing on Sundays for football or something, right? And so there's just too much to lose, and that commitment keeps you from committing crime. There's also involvement, and involvement refers to one's engrossment in conventional activities such as studying, sports, family, right? Basically, you don't commit crime because you're just too busy, preoccupied, or consumed in conforming behaviors to be able to commit crime. So, for example, a lot of you know I was a cheerleader in undergrad, right? My day pretty much looked something like this. I'd wake up in the morning, go to class, and I usually tried to front load my classes in the morning. Because around after lunch, I would usually go to the training room and do some sort of rehab or prehab because I have herniated discs in my back, and so I had to always be working on my back to make sure that it was strengthened, and I was doing essentially physical therapy for my back. Then I would go home and do homework until 5 o'clock when practice started. And practice was usually 5 to 8 or 5 to 9, depending on the night of the week. And then I would practice from 5 to 9, and then I would go home, eat dinner, and go to bed and do it all over again the next day, right? And basically that was my day every day. I was so busy as a student athlete that I didn't have time to get in trouble with anything else because there was just way too much going on in my life. I was so engrossed in these conventional activities of studying, going to class, going to practice, making sure that I was doing all my physical therapy and rehab, that I didn't really have time to do anything else. And so even if I really wanted to get involved in some deviance, I couldn't because I was just too tired or too busy. Same basic idea here, right, with a dog. My wife and I have, a 9-month-old puppy right now, and the basic idea is a tired dog is a well-behaved dog, right? And so what we do with her is we very much, when she wakes up in the morning, she has a lot of energy, and we pretty much just make it our goal during the day to see how quickly can we tire her out so that she's happy, right? Because a tired dog is a happy dog, a tired dog is a well-behaved dog, right? She's not going to rip up our carpets or chew on our baseboards if she's exhausted because my wife just took her for a 2-mile run, or because we've just been playing fetch in the backyard for 45 minutes, right, with her sprinting, or I take her to the dog park where she herds all the other dogs, right? So we try our best to keep our dog involved to keep her from doing things we don't want her to do. The last basic idea is belief, and this is the endorsement of general conventional values and norms, right? Especially the belief that laws in society's rules in general are morally correct. Now, this is different from definitions favorable and unfavorable to crime in social learning theory because these beliefs are not about specific laws or acts, but more about general beliefs about if the individual should follow the rules or not. So generally, I think the police are good people. Generally, I think you should follow the law. Generally, I think laws are there to keep us safe. Stuff like that. The big, broad things. Not, I think marijuana should be illegal. So that's basically what beliefs are. So measures of social bonding concepts, right? Attachment, and again, we know all this because Travis Hershey very detailed, used a lot of detail in writing all this out in his original publications. Attachment was measured by close parental supervision and discipline, academic achievement, attitudes towards school, and things like that, right? So how attached are you to these people? Commitment is measured by educational and occupational aspirations, as well as premature engagement in adult activities. Now, at the time in the 60s and 70s, when Travis Hershey was really pushing social bonding theory, the 3 basic behaviors that predicted deviance in future deviance as adults in juveniles were smoking, drinking, and having sex before marriage. If you committed any of those 3 things, you were considered a deviant juvenile who was probably going to go on to be a deviant adult. Now, those measurements seem kind of silly because a lot of people graduate high school smoking, drinking, and having premarital sex. And so it seems a little silly now, but those were kind of the big things back in the 60s and 70s when bonding theory first started to predict deviance. Involvement is participation in conventional activities as well as time spent with your family, doing homework, sports activities, going to youth groups, stuff like that, right? How involved are you? And then belief were just references to values relative to law-abiding behaviors, general respect for police and law, belief that laws should be obeyed, and stuff like that we've already kind of talked about. So as far as the empirical validity, you're going to find this hilarious, right? Hershey generally found support for the theory. and found that association with delinquent peers was the strongest predictor with delinquency. And the association with delinquent parents was also pretty strongly related to delinquency. What theory is that? Is that bonding theory? No, bonding theory said if you have strong associations with delinquent peers and delinquent parents, you'll still not commit crime because you're bonded to them. This is social learning theory. So Hershey, when testing bonding theory, accidentally supported social learning theory because he said, look, if you hang out with delinquent peers, you're going to be delinquent too. And Ron Akers said, exactly. Differential association within social learning theory. And so further research found that bonding to conforming peers only caused conformity when peers were conforming too, right? So the only way bonding with anyone caused conformity was when they were also conforming. If they were delinquent, it caused delinquency. Not attachment, not social bonding. That's actually social learning, right? Others have found mixed support for the different variables. However, the only thing that has fairly consistently been found is that religious bonds were strongly related to conforming. So if you are very, very religious, you probably are not committing a lot of crimes unless your religion is one of those crazy ones like Charlie Manson religion or something like that, or Warren Jeffs or something, right, where you're drinking the Kool-Aid out in the middle of the woods somewhere. But if it's a typical, like Judaism, typical Christianity, typical Islam, you probably are going to be conforming. So, Hershey pushed bonding theory, big fan of bonding theory, wrote bonding theory, supported bonding theory for a while, up until 1999. Then he and Mike Gottfredson got together, and they wrote a book called A General Theory of Crime. Kind of pompous sounding title for a book, right? But Hershey was one of the authors, right? He moved away from social bonding and focused his attention on one type of control in particular: self-control. Now, I've already told you a couple slides ago, Hershey, the reason he wrote bonding theory is because he said self-control is too tautological, it can't be measured, and it's too open to interpretation. Fast forward 20 years, he and Mike Gottfredson get together and say, never mind, we've changed our minds. Self-control is important, right? And they present the theory as a general theory that explains all types of crime across all ages and circumstances. Travis Hershey is one of the few criminologists in the world that is the author of two major theories of crime and deviance that many view as competing theories of crime and deviance, all right? So the basic idea of self-control theory is pretty much common sense. Individuals with high self-control will be substantially less likely to commit crime at all stages of life, and those with low self-control will commit crime, right? Now, it's not good enough to just say that. The circumstances need to be right as well. It's not just good enough to say you have low self-control, you're a criminal. You have high self-control, you won't be. Circumstances need to be present to affect that. The sources of low self-control are ineffective socialization and parenting, right? Parents who discipline and raise children properly will instill a certain level of self-control, whereas parents who don't discipline their kids and don't raise their kids properly will not instill self-control, and those kids will be more deviant, right? It's also believed that self-control is developed in childhood and pretty much remains stable throughout your life. Between the ages of like 10 and 13, your level of self-control is cemented in, and that is what it is no matter what. You cannot raise or lower your self-control levels as an adult. It just is what it is. This video here is a famous test called the marshmallow test, where you drop a marshmallow in front of like 3 to 5-year-olds and say, if you can eat this marshmallow now or wait 5 minutes and I'll come back, and if you haven't eaten this marshmallow, I'll give you a second one, right? So it's a basic test of self-control in kids. Ironically enough, researchers actually followed up with these kids and found that the kids who ate the marshmallow early, who didn't wait for the essentially 100% reward or increase in marshmallow consumption, 20 years later, also, more likely than not, had criminal justice contact compared to the kids who waited. So there's some support for self-control in that regard, right? And so it's important that you have, and we all have friends like this, right? We all probably grew up and we knew those parents that seemed at the time like cool parents because they let their kids do whatever they wanted, bought their kids whatever they wanted, never said no to their kids. And you're like, come on, mom and dad, why couldn't you just be more like that? Why couldn't you just give me anything I wanted like my friends? But now it's like those same kids are still living in their parents' houses, probably playing video games all day, not going to college, not doing much with their lives, and maybe even have minor records, right? And so we know that clearly there's something about parenting and something about good discipline within a household that does instill something that keeps kids from being deviant, but it's unclear what that is. So, low self-control is similar to internal controls in bonding theory. However, as previously stated, bonding said self-control has no place in the theory. It's subsumed under the concept of attachment, right? But the four elements of bonding theory are absent from self-control theory, period, right? So Hershey wrote bonding theory, said these four elements are super important. Then wrote self-control theory and said, yeah, bump those four elements. The only thing that matters is self-control. And because of that, most researchers view these theories as competing theories of deviance. Hershey is the only one who says, no, 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 no. They're complementary because if you have high attachment predicts your levels of self-control, and that self-control predicts your levels of commitment, involvement, and belief. Now, that's not written anywhere in either theory. In fact, it unequivocally is written in bonding theory that self-control has no place in the theory. However, Hershey has done some sort of mental gymnastics and massaging of his ideas in order to somehow make them complementary somehow, right? So as far as the testability of self-control theory, low self-control also explains analogous behaviors, according to Gottfredson and Hershey. And these are behaviors like smoking and drinking underage and premarital sex also. And these are seen as manifestations of low self-control. So I know you have low self-control because you're smoking, drinking, and having premarital sex. However, Gottfredson and Hershey never give an operational definition of low self-control, which is a huge problem. Hershey changed the field by saying, everyone who's proposing a theory needs to lay out everything in great detail, give us operational definitions, test it, show empirical support for it. Then the next major theory he writes, he doesn't do it. And because of that, self-control becomes a tautological idea that's untestable. The only reason you know someone has low self-control is because you know they're delinquent. Why are they delinquent? Because they have low self-control. And round we go, right? And so Travis Hershey, now also especially when Akers and Hershey disciples end up duking it out at conferences, that's one of the big things that gets talked about is the lack of operationalization and testability of the concept of self-control. Now, granted, Grasmick et al. Have tried to fix that by making a validated measure of self-control, but there are still some issues with that measurement. So what are the policy implications of these theories? Well, social bonding theory's policy implications are virtually identical to social learning theories, right? Because they're very, very similar theories. Self-control, however, has very different policy implications, right? Interventions that take place early in life and aim to increase levels of self-control in youth are way more important, and we view this as prevention rather than treatment. Go into areas where parental supervision may not be as strong, where the educational system might not be as strong, and do our best to increase self-control levels so that these students are not developing low levels of self-control and then later turning deviant. As always, if you have any questions about these theories, please let me know, and I will talk to you soon.